Sheikh Hasina's continuance in office became untenable. There is not another murder of the kinds which happened with her father and with many other leaders in Bangladesh. Quotas becomes a very emotional issue for people. The whole country is waiting and watching what will happen next.
Who are the key actors that can bring normalcy into Bangladesh today?
She still thought she could stay on in power.
What does US, what does China, what does India gain from this?
This was an American plot to destabilize Bangladesh.
Thinking politics, talking politics, writing politics is one thing, and on the streets getting votes is quite another thing. Namaste. Welcome to the second edition of the Rising India podcast. This is a podcast that tracks the rise of India in all its aspects, in every possible way. It tracks the hurdles as well. Recently, we've seen Dhaka burning, Bangladesh is down, Sheikh Hasina is fled, Mohammed Yunus is likely to take charge. In all this, there is a lot of blame game happening. The US is being blamed, China is being blamed, even India is being blamed for this change. It seems to me that commentators across the world feel that Bangladesh has no agency of its own, that its people are irrelevant, and it's just one small pawn in the larger chessboard of geopolitics. We have several opinions on this, many blames being thrown around, many questions. But there are no answers. It's a very fluid time right now for Bangladesh. We are all observing it very carefully. To discuss this and more, we have with us someone who is an expert on Pakistan. I would say he's India's number one Pakistan commentator and among the world's 5 top commentators on that geography. He is also an expert on the neighborhood. What people don't know is that he's also an economist. He's an economist by education, and when you see his analysis that is tempered with a lot of economics, it's because of that. He's been able to do all this multi-subject, multidisciplinary studies into the analysis that he does. Welcome, Sushant Sareen, Senior Fellow at Observer Research Foundation.
Thanks, Gautam. I've never really had somebody appreciate me so much, but thanks a lot for that.
Should I apologize?
No, it's fine.
You take that compliment?
I love that compliment.
Okay, great. So with that background in place on what's happening in Bangladesh, I have just 4 sets of questions. So you're going to go very easy on this. But before that, can you just give us an overall view as to what is happening? Why has it suddenly exploded? Till a few days ago, all was okay, and suddenly one flare-up, and it's all gone. What's happening?
Gautam, I think, we have woken up from a kind of a slumber because suddenly everything has exploded. But there were things bubbling under the surface for a fair bit of time that was being brushed under the carpet. And Bangladesh has always been a bit of a tinderbox. It's always gone through a lot of convulsions. And then what it takes is that when the pressure starts building up in a system, all it takes is a spark. Now, the current thing starts with a certain judgment which comes from the High Court, which restores certain quotas. Now, I'm not getting into the details. I think everybody knows about what those quotas were in government jobs. And the moment those quotas come in, and as we have seen, for example, in India's case, quotas becomes a very emotional issue for people. Even though 99.9% of the people are not going to benefit from the quotas, it nevertheless becomes a very, very emotional issue, especially for students. And the students came out on the street. Now, that is what has happened on the surface. The students come out on the streets demonstrating. That demonstration continues to grow and snowball into a bigger movement. That movement is then kind of, attaches itself to an anti-government, anti-regime sentiment. in which all kinds of other players probably have also put in their part. And even though, subsequently the government appealed the judgment, the Supreme Court kind of moderated it, reduced the quotas that are allocated to the progeny of freedom fighters, it was too little too late. And so the things had snowballed to a point where Sheikh Hasina's continuance in office became untenable. The army continued to back her up to a point, and then finally, when her position became untenable, has asked her to leave, which is a good thing, that there is not another murder of the kinds which happened with her father and with many other leaders in Bangladesh. That's not on the conscience of Bangladesh. But the country is in a state of meltdown, if you can call it that. There is no government as we speak. There is efforts to form a government, but there is no government as yet. The army is notionally in command, but the reports from the ground suggest that there is no police. There is places where there are flare-ups which have taken place. There are reprisal attacks against the erstwhile ruling party. There are pogroms against the minority communities. That is happening. Some of them are trying to be controlled. Others are out of control. And the whole country is waiting and watching what will happen next. So there is no clarity on how things are going to unfold from here on. There is certainly no clarity on what the future roadmap, both the political and economic roadmap of Bangladesh is going to be. So I think that is what happens in situations like this, when suddenly the entire thing collapses, and then you have to start rebuilding up from scratch.
Yeah, so if that is indeed the state of affairs, then I will just come to my first question after this half a question. If normalcy has gone and nobody, neither the army nor the civil government nor the police are in charge, then how is normalcy going to come?
The police, for example, the police has been targeted because the police was at the forefront of trying to control the agitation, right? So police has become, and as happens in the subcontinent very often, the police becomes an object of hate for everybody. It is the symbol of authority.
Becomes the symbol of the state.
It's the symbol of the state, symbol of authority, and that is being challenged. So it becomes the favorite whipping boy of everybody. So what has happened is that police stations have been burned, policemen have been targeted, and the police has simply said, okay, fine, if this is what is going to happen, then we've gone on strike. They've gone on strike. So there is no policing taking place. There's no traffic police, there's no regular policing taking place, which means that you could enter into a state of anarchy. And if the army has to then step in, what are they going to do? Will they use excessive force to curb disturbances? We don't know. So, like I said, it's
so who
all
are
up
the
in the
key
air.
actors that can bring normalcy into Bangladesh today?
The assumption is that the army will be able to do it.
But that's like a revert to the mean. It happens in Pakistan all the time. In all dictatorships, this is a revert to the mean. When everything is gone, go back to the army.
Exactly. So, but here is the problem. Now, if you could go back to the army, and I'm not saying that you can't, and I'm not saying that the army will not be able to restore control, but what is worrying me is that, look, things have started changing. The old assumptions on the basis of which we try and assess and analyze situations, I think we need to re-examine those assumptions. Now, let me give you an example of that. I've written about it also, but, for the sake of this podcast, our assumption was that in Afghanistan, for example, the Afghan Republic would stand, the Afghan National Army will be able to resist the onslaught of the Taliban. Everybody assumed that. And everybody was saying that, well, at least till December 2021, there is nothing to worry about. And then one fine day, everything collapsed like a house of cards, right? We saw that in Myanmar, for example. When the army did the coup in 2022 or 2021, everybody assumed that, this is like the normal thing in Myanmar. The army is the dominant force. It comes in, it takes over control, and then, for the foreseeable future, the army is able to carry on doing whatever it wants
Bring
to
the
do.
normalcy that is to some extent.
It was normal, but it was pretty normal for the army to step in. But what did we see in Myanmar? The whole country exploded, and Myanmar has become ungovernable. There are multiple civil wars that have broken out there. It's a complete crisis-ridden state. The army has not been able to restore control. Pakistan, where the army rigged an election, stole an election. They have hounded the political opposition. I'm no fan of that opposition, but they've done whatever they could do. But they don't control the narrative. They don't control anything anymore. It's pathetic to see the army behave the way it is behaving. And there are dire predictions of a civil war taking place in Pakistan now. And now in Bangladesh, our assumption is the same, that the army will step in, restore control, and everything will go back to normal. There'll be a reset button which will be pressed. Will it be? Will the army be able to control it? We don't know. So I am not going to pass a judgment one way or another whether the army will be able to restore control and how effectively it will be able to restore control. Because look at it.
So army is one of the actors. Are there any other actors who can? Because see, it's a large country in the sense.
It's a very significant country. It's 180 million people.
That's right. In terms of number of people, it's probably the world's 8th largest. In terms of economy, it's somewhere between Denmark and Norway. So it's a large economy. It's a large country. Lots of people, poor, but they are all there. You can't just let them be. And particularly in our neighborhood, I wanted to come to this at the end, but the discussion has forced me there. So then who are the key actors that can help normalize the situation? They don't like the US. They don't like India. They don't like Pakistan. The army may or may not be able to fix it. The civilian government may or may not get legitimacy. Then how is Bangladesh going to get fixed?
We don't know, but that is precisely what the problem is. Look, again, I wouldn't put everything in black and white that nobody likes us. There are many people who like us, many people who do business with us. It's not that we don't have political capital in Bangladesh. It's not that we don't have agency in Bangladesh. Similarly, the Americans, it's not that everybody hates the Americans. The Americans remain very influential. The Chinese have their pockets of influence, and of course the Pakistanis, through the Jamaat-e-Islami and other terrorist and fundamentalist organizations, also play a role. But Bangladeshis also have agency. The Bangladeshi people, there are political parties in Bangladesh. We know of course, the BNP, which has been hounded, which has been severely degraded, but is there. It remains a player. There are other Islamic parties. We might not like them, but they are players in the system. And I'm not just talking about the Jamaat-e-Islami. There are other various kinds of parties.
So let me rephrase the question. Is there a possibility, and if so, what is the probability of Bangladesh becoming another Afghanistan? Talibanization or hard Islamic rule? I don't know. I'm just thinking of the worst nightmares for those people. So is there such a probability?
Yeah, I think Talibanization is a bit of a trope. But yes, Islamic fundamentalism is a very real problem in Bangladesh. I think nobody can really ignore that. And it's not a problem that anybody has been able to put a lid on. They've tried to control it in one form or another, played footsie with it, flirted with it, tried to address it, try to co-opt it, try to do many things. But at least in terms of street power, the Islamists are fairly strong. Again, in Bangladesh or in Pakistan for that matter, because at one level, that was part of the same country, the Islamists don't necessarily win popularity contests. But the Islamists have a lot of street power. They have a lot of nuisance value. And they can disrupt, their disruption power is enormous.
So let me rephrase the question once again.
No, one second.
Is the democracy of Bangladesh in danger?
I think it's important, one second, before you come back to your rephrasing of your question. So on the Islamist issue, when you say that will it become another Afghanistan, probably not. My bigger fear is, from an Indian point of view, that it becomes another Pakistan. It was East Pakistan. Is it becoming an East Pakistan once again? Not in the sense that it's run by Pakistan, but in terms of its mindset, anti-India, anti-Hindu mindset. Does it become another East Pakistan? Now, again, this was something we spoke about on a television channel yesterday. The thing is that Pakistan actually works for the West. The West loves the Pakistanis. They can do anything and they get a free pass. They get aid. They get all kinds of things. So maybe the Pakistani model is what the Bangladeshis could be looking at. I don't know. Maybe I'm saying it in half
is the
jest.
world going to lose another democracy in the next 6 months?
Yeah, I don't think the world. Which world are we talking about? Look, when we talk about the world, what world are we talking about? Are we talking about the Western world? I don't think they give a damn about democracy. It's virtue signaling which they do when they talk about democracy. It's a kind of a political tool for them to talk about democracy. When they want to do business with somebody, then democracy does not stop them or prevent them from doing business with the worst kind of dictators, right? They've done business with them, and in fact, they love doing business with dictators. But when you want to pressurize somebody, then you will produce freedom index, you will produce democracy index. Incidentally, yesterday I was seeing somewhere that Bangladesh was like many rungs higher than India on happiness index.
That's right.
Right? So you produce these kind of indexes because, you hate the government in India. You might want India on your side, but you hate the sight of the government in India. So, this is virtue signaling at its worst. There is no morality. When the West pretends that we are coming from a higher moral ground, that's utter nonsense. There is no higher moral ground. See, morality matters during tough times. If you compromise on your morals, when the crunch time comes, then you're not being moralistic. Then you are being virtue signaling, right? That's what you're doing. That is what the West does. So whether you imposed a lot of sanctions, for example, on the Awami League, and you hectored them, you lectured them, you did all kinds of things as far as Bangladesh and Sheikh Hasina's government was concerned. And I'm not saying that this was, some kind of a lily white, pure kind of democratic government. I'm not saying that. There were a lot of problems, and we can talk about it later. But, on the west of India, there is another country called Pakistan. Out there, the generals are feted. They are lauded. The American ambassador out there will laud Pakistan's fight against terrorists. Can you believe it? They say Pakistan has been fighting terrorists. I've not heard of anything more ridiculous than that. But the Americans will give them aid. Apparently, they've asked for about $101 million to give to Pakistan to protect democracy, to promote democracy, human rights, and one more thing. Okay, what? This is like living in an alternate reality, or thinking that everybody is an idiot and that, the State Department knows what it's doing. So, yeah, those are the hypocrisy and the double standards of the West. So, which world are you talking about when you say that the world is bothered about democracy? I don't think the Chinese give a damn about democracy. I don't think the Russians care. I think we would like a good democratic, progressive democracy in Bangladesh, but as a neighboring country, we will deal with whatever there is in Bangladesh. We don't have a choice.
Okay, so I'll just change tack a bit. Has the world made today, is Bangladesh, is Dhaka now a geopolitical theater? Everybody is, like I spoke earlier, everybody seems to be blamed. Everybody is being blamed except the Bangladeshis themselves. And everybody is playing their own games in and around this small incident. Small in the footprints of time. Okay, yeah, it's big, it's large, it shouldn't have happened, etc. But it's a small semicolon. Has this become a geopolitical playfield?
Yeah, Gautam, everything is a geopolitical playfield. There is nothing spontaneous in the world. Okay, the thing is that there were issues, like I said at the outset. There are issues in Bangladesh. There was a kind of a political volcano that was bubbling under the surface. Then it got a trigger, things took off. Now, how much of it was orchestrated, how much of it was planned, we don't know. There is a lot of speculation. There is all kinds of charges are being heard that the Chinese were behind it, the Pakistanis were behind it. I'm sure everybody would have tried to play some kind of a role to to benefit from what was happening, or to increase their own footprint and their own leverages. But who really prompted it, we don't know. But everybody, see, when a situation like this develops, everybody wants to take advantage of it. What we know is that the Sheikh Hasina government had cracked down very hard on the Pakistanis over the last 15 years. She had shut down all the ISI operations, or at least bulk of them, at least the ones which we know of. She had shut them down. She had cracked down very hard. There was a very, very, very strong vigil kept on what was happening inside the Pakistani, the activities of Pakistanis and of the Pakistan High Commission out there. All of that was happening. With the Chinese, of course, there is some talk that there were certain issues that had cropped up in recent months. There is talk
But
about...
China has an issue with every country.
Yeah,
nothing new in
so
in
nothing
that.
new in it. And then, of course, there is the American factor, where in the public domain, I am not getting into conspiracy theories and stuff like that, but even in the public domain, there have been published reports of how the American officials have threatened the Bangladeshi government, the sanctions that were imposed on the Awami League leadership, and on other officials in Bangladesh, the kind of statements that were coming out of the US, the kind of lobbying that was taking place, incidentally, from people of the Jamaat-e-Islami. Much of that lobbying that was taking place in the United States was happening with the backing of the Jamaat-e-Islami, or people linked with the Jamaat-e-Islami, including that guy who keeps coming on State Department television channels asking silly questions, Bangladeshi fellow, which are really put up questions. So all of that was happening. So the Americans, and then of course there is the charges which Sheikh Hasina herself has hurled at the Americans, where she says that they were pressuring me to give them an air base. I was refusing that, and then she has spoken about, or she had spoken about, a sinister plot to carve out a kind of a Christian enclave within Bangladesh, which would then, and then there was, people took off from there, linking Manipur, what is happening in Myanmar, all of that. So there has been that talk. And then, of course, the favorite whipping boy of everybody in the region, India. And that the Indian factor was behind what has been happening in Bangladesh. The fact of the matter remains that, yes, the government in Bangladesh was a good friend of India. It had addressed many of India's concerns. I would not say all, but it had addressed many of India's concerns. There were also issues between India and the Bangladesh government, because after all, it was the government of Bangladesh.
But those are very common things
which is a very normal thing.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. That it's the government of Bangladesh, it's not the government of West Bengal, or East Bengal.
So let's turn these issues around. What does US gain? What does China gain? We know what Pakistan gains, but what does US, what does China, what does India gain from this?
So I think India doesn't gain anything. In fact, for India, it's a nightmarish situation.
So clearly, India's hand in it is not...
certainly not, but that's nonsense.
Fine, so that's out. Now that leaves us...
At best, what India can... what India has done in the recent crisis, and if we go by the statement of the External Affairs Minister, we had been counselling restraint, we had been counselling that you get into a dialogue. We can't do anything more than that. We can speak to friends in a friendly manner. We are not, our diplomacy is not the American kind of diplomacy that, you shout out from the pulpit and you hector people and you sermonize people. We don't do that. We will have a quiet chat with whoever is in power as a friend, counsel them to do certain things. That's what we did. If they don't listen to us, there isn't much we can do about it.
So then what that leaves us with the US and China. So China, you can say, wants to destabilize India, so it can use Pakistan as a proxy, which it has in the past as well, and continues to do in Kashmir, has now moved to the eastern side. So that is understandable. What does US gain from this?
So I think that is the bit of a mystery. Because it doesn't make sense for the Americans to have done what they have done. Again, they did this in Iraq, right? After I understand that it made sense for Americans to have a huge beef with Saddam Hussein pre 9/11, but post 9/11, Saddam was a man who had stood up against the jihadist forces, right? He was the bane of the jihadist forces. He had cracked down on them like nothing else. And yet, after 9/11, you blamed him for being hand in glove with Al Qaeda. That was one of the charges against him. It didn't make sense to destabilize Iraq. And what the Americans did by destabilizing Iraq, just look what has happened in the region after that. I think some similar silly policy is at play insofar as Bangladesh is
So
concerned.
they wished the conjecture could be that they want to destabilize this region, the India region.
Well, that is one set of speculations that they. So there are some people. Again, a lot of this is maybe conspiracy theories with some kernel of truth in it. One is that the Americans are deliberately, they are really angry with India about this entire position of strategic autonomy that India has taken, our relationship with the Russians, etc., etc. They are very, very angry about it, and they want to teach, part of it is to teach us a bit of a lesson, queer up the pitch for us. And one
So
of
we
the
stop
ways,
buying Russian oil from tomorrow. That's the objective.
not just buying Russian oil, but
Arms.
dealing with Russia and all of that. Again, like I said, much of this is speculation, conspiracy theories, with some elements, which have been pieced together because conspiracy theories always have these elements that are pieced together. So one is that. The other is that maybe they felt that, maybe it is just the lobbying inside the American system which has forced the hands of the American administration to get rid of Sheikh Hasina. But get rid of her and bring who? Now, if for example, again, speculation that Muhammad Yunus, the man who's...
No, it's there. His assistant has confirmed that he's got...
No, he has accepted it.
Yeah.
Will he be accepted? See, there is a bit of a question
No,
mark.
what we are looking right now is an interim government.
But-
so after that, there will be elections. So that's where the real government will...
That is the problem with countries like Bangladesh and Pakistan, that these post-dated checks very often bounce. In Pakistan, for example, Ziaul Haq had promised elections. Every 90 days, he would promise election in the next 90 days. I think he was there for 11 years? Never really held elections except for a partyless election. In Bangladesh, again, we've had, I think in 2007 it was, that there was a caretaker government which came in actually to start elections, but then stayed on for almost 2 years. So
let's come to Muhammad Yunus. He's a technocrat. He may have some political instincts, but I don't see...
He tried his
he's
politics,
He's
he
not a
failed.
political person. And, thinking politics, talking politics, writing politics is one thing. And on the streets, getting votes is quite another thing. You can write all the politics you wish to. You won't get even your Resident Welfare Association vote. One vote you will not get.
Yeah, I stood up for an election for a resident welfare association. I got 5 votes, 3 of which were for my own family members. So
Exactly.
Yeah, I know what we are
so
talking
he's a technocrat.
Yeah.
So I don't think he...
Yeah, but see, people have delusions about themselves. And people have this thing that, yes, I'm actually, like Musharraf had this thing that I have 7 million followers on Facebook. So when I land in Karachi, there will be a mass of people who will come to receive me. I think there were about 7 people who came to receive him. So maybe Muhammad Yunus has similar delusions about himself and his grandeur and his position. And maybe the Americans have similar things about him, because one of the theories that is doing the round is that he is the American nominee. That
Exactly.
Again, like people have kind of
these are all
linked up everything.
conspiracies. Yeah.
But they've linked it all up. Of course, he is very close to the Americans, and that they wanted their man in place. So maybe that is what Muhammad Yunus is all about. Look, the point is, when these people go into elections, that is when you get to know what your political worth is. Now, the same Muhammad Yunus had set up a party in 2007, 2008. In that period, he had set up a party. The army was also trying to back him up at that point of time. He went into election. I don't even remember if he won a single seat. So, the point is that it is one thing to tell how a country should be run, but to run a country is an entirely
Exactly,
different thing.
that's the point I was making. Why didn't she go to Dubai in the first flight?
Okay, one immediate reason could be that her flight happened rather suddenly. I think if one of the reports which has been published in Bangladesh in a prominent Bangladeshi newspaper is anything to go by, she still thought she could stay on in power. And then finally, when the house started collapsing, so it was a very rushed exit. And in a very rushed exit, I think India, being an old friend, the closest neighbor, it was a natural choice to come to India. That is one very clear explanation. Whether she continues to stay on as an honored guest in India, or she stays for some time in India and then goes to some other country.
Her son has been saying that she will now enjoy her grandchildren, and she is retired from politics.
She could enjoy her grandchildren in India, because if the Western countries with all their virtue signaling do not allow her in, because her son lives in the United States, so if she has to enjoy with her grandchildren, then the US needs to give her a visa.
But they have revoked the visa, apparently. I mean, these are just reports. It's not confirmed. It's not confirmed.
They could very well do it. They have done it in the past. And frankly, the Brits have, for example, the Brits are ready to give refuge to war criminals of people who have been involved in genocide in Bangladesh, live in Canada and Britain as honored guests and, stalwart citizens of those countries. Very well protected, including Khalistani terrorists also are kept very well out in these countries. But a bona fide political leader like Sheikh Hasina is being denied, at least in the first instance, is being denied refuge.
Yeah, which goes back to your virtue signaling thing, which is that a whole lot of illegal immigrants have come into not just UK, even Europe, but those who are coming knocking on the front doors, they are being denied, they are being delayed, etc., etc. But that aside, what is the geopolitics here? Why would UK do such a thing? If the terrorists are welcome, why not a legitimate ex-leader?
There is a lot of cynicism in international politics, and I think that is why I never take the West very seriously when they give me moral lectures. It's nauseating to hear these lectures from the Western countries. The bottom line is that I think they made their own calculations. Now they all hunt in a pack. So if the Americans have taken a position, the Brits are not going to go against the Americans, and none of the other countries, which are aligned to them, will take a different position. So one is that I think those positions have been coordinated. In the case of Britain, for example, I don't even know if Sheikh Hasina would be safe in Britain. I don't know if anybody is safe in Britain anymore, given the kind of scenes we've seen.
The terrorists are safe.
Yeah, the terrorists, of course, are honored guests, whether in Canada, in Britain, even in the US. But so one is that part of it. So it doesn't really make sense for them. See, the British policy in the past used to be that all these people used to be welcomed guests because the Brits had a global footprint, and then, they could use these leaders who were staying in exile in Britain as a kind of a lever against governments around the world for various reasons. I think some of that has stopped now. The second part is that within Britain, for example, there is this whole concept of the Muslim vote, and a lot of the Muslim vote in Britain is highly radicalized. And Sheikh Hasina is like a red rag before many of these characters, whether it's the Pakistanis or many of the radicalized Bangladeshi diaspora in Britain. She would be like a red rag. So maybe it is domestic political compulsions that have prevented her. Maybe it's just good old-fashioned virtue signaling. we don't know. Maybe there is something more sinister at play. Maybe, as some people have speculated, it is to destroy Sheikh Hasina's political reputation, that you let her stay in India and project her as an Indian stooge, which she never was, because there were many things that she would dig her heels in on India, which were not necessarily against Bangladeshi interests, but she was not ready to do many things. So she was her own. She had her own agency, and in many ways, she was a diehard Bangladeshi patriot. But they want to project her as some kind of an Indian stooge. So maybe that is what is at play. That you let her continue to stay in India and destroy
in any case,
her reputation.
It's still unfolding.
Yeah, it's still an unfolding
we are just
situation.
2 days into the event right now. So what does it mean for India? Why do we have 9,000 students? What are they studying in Bangladesh? What's so great about the education system of Bangladesh that 9,000 students from India are going to study there?
Look, I think the students mostly go out there for things like medical education, technical education. One of the reasons is it's cheaper to go and study out there. Admissions are available because they're not available in India. It's very difficult to get a seat in a medical college in India, for example. So you'll see Indian students go to countries you might not even have heard of.
Ukraine.
Well, we've heard of Ukraine now. But, many other countries in Europe and all. People go. It's much cheaper than Western countries. The level of education is not bad. Even in Bangladesh, the medical education, maybe some engineering colleges, some other things. So I think that is the reason why many kids go to Bangladesh. It's cheaper to travel to Bangladesh. Those are the basic factors. Nothing.
Okay, so what does it mean for India now?
I think it's a nightmare.
Is India becoming a geography surrounded by hostile forces?
In a sense, India has always been surrounded by hostile forces. We hear a lot of this political rhetoric in India that, the neighborhood is turned anti-India. When was the neighborhood not anti-India? When Mr. Rajiv Gandhi was the Prime Minister, the countries of the subcontinent formed SAARC as a kind of a ganging up against India. That was if you ask the old timers in the Ministry of External Affairs, SAARC's original plan was a way of ganging up against India, right? You had all those countries ganging up against India. So Pakistan has always been hostile. Okay, Nepal, people forget what it was like when King Birendra was there. Even after Birendra was assassinated and his brother took over, the relations were not always the best. Even when there were elected governments in Nepal, we've always had problems with Nepal on things which would have actually worked for Nepal. For example, on water issues
Energy.
and all. Nepal has a tremendous hydroelectric potential, never been able to exploit it because of, the most silly and petty reasons. Okay. So you've had problems with Nepal. You've had problems with Bangladesh. In fact, the last 15 years have been almost the best period we've had in 50 years of Bangladesh's history. And the credit for that certainly goes to the Congress party, because the Congress party was in power when Sheikh Hasina came into power in 2009, and Modi took it forward. So yes, it was a national policy towards Bangladesh, which has paid rich dividends.
How can now India? How can India repair? Obviously, it will be watching very carefully, as you and I also are, and as the new government gets formed, probably there will be overtures for discussions, discourse, trade, and other such things. But what's your instinct here?
Yeah, look, it all depends on what the future roadmap is going to be. It depends on how events unfold from here on. So we can just speculate. Okay, one is that in the very immediate, there is this concern about the law and order situation and the stability in Bangladesh. Will the pogroms against Hindus continue, for example? And if they do, will we see an exodus of Hindus out of Bangladesh into India. Not just Hindus. There is a very large number of Muslims who could actually face retribution and reprisals from the Islamists and other groups which had been bottled up for the last 15 years.
Which Muslims are these?
The
Why would Muslims be...
Awami League people, Awami League supporters, some liberal, progressive Bangladeshi Muslims who have always come out and stood up very strongly against fanatical forces in Bangladesh. They could start being targeted now. We've already, individually, a lot of people have been targeted in the past, including during Sheikh Hasina's rule. Even even Hindus have been targeted during the Awami League rule, and the Awami League had its share of thugs who would target the Hindu community because they were easy meat. You could bully them. You could badger them.
There were no repercussions. There were no consequences.
There were no consequences. So and you had political support. You could snatch their property. You could do all kinds of things to them. In a sense, they were the new Jews of Bangladesh. The point is that, but there are Muslims who have stood up for secular values, who have stood up for progressive values.
All of whom are in danger.
All of whom are going to be targeted, and then people will be targeted for political reasons, simply because you were associated with a political party. For example, I've just read in the morning today that the father and son who had produced a movie on Bangabandhu, they have been lynched to death. So there have been these kind of killings. So a lot of people will want to, escape. Many of them will make a beeline for India. So there is that crisis which comes in. Now, that creates a problem for us because if there are these crimes against humanity which are carried out against the Hindu community, that inflames passions in India. And that disturbs our own social and political harmony.
And this is across the globe, there is no discussion that there is a Hindu genocide is happening.
No, of course not. Because you think the Americans give a damn about Hindu lives? You think the Brits give a damn about Hindu lives? Look, remember one thing. When the genocide, a documented genocide of Hindus was taking place in East Pakistan in 1970-71, who were the Americans supporting?
Pakistan.
There is no morality in international relations. But of course, that is a problem. But look, so this is an immediate, the most immediate crisis is how do you protect the Indian citizens who are in Bangladesh, right? The students, as you say, the businessmen, the traders, the diplomats. How do you protect Indian citizens who are in Bangladesh? That is your first priority. Your second issue is going to be this refugee crisis or a possible refugee crisis. Or even the fact that minorities are being targeted, because if these kind of crimes continue, it has repercussions in India. So this is your immediate. Then, of course, you will have to wait and see what kind of a government, what kind of stability is there in Bangladesh. Now, normally what we have seen, and I'm not saying that is what is going to happen this time, normally when Bangladesh has gone through these convulsions, they don't end, that, okay, fine, Sheikh Hasina is gone and everything has gone back to normal. So there would be some degree of normalcy, then there would be another upsurge, then there would be more destabilization. So it takes a bit of time before things start settling down. So now that period could be a couple of months, it could be a couple of years. We don't know how that's going to play out. We'll have to wait and see. But that means that you have that instability, which means that the Bangladesh economy, which eminent economists were saying that, is like the toast of the town, and India is such a third-rate country, Bangladesh has overtaken us. We were told that about Sri Lanka as well. We were told that about many other countries. We continue to survive and thrive. We've seen what has happened to them, but that's a separate debate. But look, if the economy tanks, right, it's a one-product economy in many ways. And if that one-product economy, which is market-sensitive, which is price-sensitive, which is time-sensitive in the sense that you have to make deliveries on time, otherwise orders get cancelled. If that export industry collapses or suffers major setbacks, as apparently some reports suggest they have. Factories have been burned, factories have been shut for the last week, 10 days, no work is taking place. Then you have an economic crisis coming in. So then it's a kind of a cascading effect which starts.
So, like you said, this looks to me it's becoming another Pakistan. Pakistan faces the same problem with its exports, the same economic potential contractions in its economy. So they seem to be reverting to the mean what they once were.
Unfortunately.
Okay. Now, my last question, and I want to just draw out a little bit here.
No, but one second. Let me just go back to what we were talking about. So one is that immediate thing. So how does the political stability come? And then what is the roadmap? Now, let us assume the best case scenario that there is a short-term interim government. Although I don't think, the kind of ambitions that Muhammad Yunus at his ripe old age is showing, he's interested only in a 2 or 3 month period. I think he's looking for much longer innings. But let us assume that it's only a couple of months before elections happen. Then what kind of a government is thrown up? Now, let us assume it's a government of, say, BNP. And I'm just speculating. Will it revert to the hostility of the past where it was sponsoring Indian separatist groups, arming them, giving them sanctuary, hobnobbing with Islamic terror groups, which are also active in India, becoming a base for ISI operations against India? Will it revert to the old type, or will it realize that, look, there is much more to be gained from a cooperative relationship with India, and that all that India needs is that her security concerns should be addressed? We don't know. So we'll have to wait and see what happens in that particular case. Then there is the larger angle. Does Bangladesh, because look, even if I accept for a moment, for the sake of argument, that this was an American plot to destabilize Bangladesh, I think the guys who are actually going to benefit from it, as of now, that is what it looks like, are China and Pakistan. So if the Chinese footprint increases in Bangladesh, that's certainly bad news for us, right? So it's a bit of a nightmarish situation for us on our eastern front, because we already have a Myanmar which is in a meltdown state. We now have a Bangladesh which is highly likely to be disturbed for some time, and greater Chinese influence in Bangladesh. So you have another front open up on the eastern flank. You already have a hostile Pakistan, and you already have a serious contestation, if not conflict, with China on your north. So, if you look at it in a strategic sense, it's not a very happy situation for India.
So I want to just zoom out before we close, which is that suddenly violence has become a tool of regime change, etc., and it's being legitimized all across the world.
When was
from
it
the
not?
UK to US to now Bangladesh, and I hear things about it that it's time for such a thing in India, or will such a thing in
They
India
tried
happen?
it.
And I know the farm protests
No, not just the farm protests, the CAA movement.
and the CA.
They tried it.
So is violence, are states receding? Is violence advancing in this new whatever age, or in this decade? Let's say.
Yes, it has. It's become a currency of power. See, one reason for that is also that governments need to be more responsive and more sensitive to voices from the ground. Very often you see a kind of arrogance, and this we saw in Bangladesh, and when you get very arrogant about power, you tend to isolate and insulate yourself from the voices on the ground, and if you don't have an ear to the ground, you don't know what's happening, right? And then things, and you surround yourself with a coterie of carpenters and, plumbers and carpenters and tailors, that kind of crowd, who are just lauding your virtues, many of them non-existent. So you have closed yourself in a kind of an ivory tower, and you don't, as a politician, if you don't know what is happening on the ground, if you can't feel the pulse of the people, then what kind of a politician are you? So what happens is that because of your arrogance, you think, one diktat and that's it. You can do it for some time, but somewhere along the line it backfires. So what I'm saying is that if you are not going to be responsive and you're not going to be able to address politically some of the concerns that are coming from bottom up, then violence becomes the only way to shake and wake up the system. One, I'm not defending it or anything, but I'm just saying that this is how it's playing out. That is one part of it. The second part of it is if you start closing avenues of dissent, if you start rigging elections. So look, in India, you've tried everything. You went into an election. The forces arraigned against the incumbent government threw in everything, but it was a free and fair election. These guys are expecting 350, 400. They were reduced to 240. But nobody cribbed about the election. The election process was fair. The election results were fair. The counting was fair. It wasn't a rigged election by no stretch of imagination. So, the pressure goes out of the system, and now you go back to normal. You'll do your politicking, you'll curse each other, you'll cooperate with each other.
I'm more concerned about how easy it is for a small group of people to incite violence and term that as voices from the ground,
there is a book
as legitimate demands, or people not listening, or power being abused, etc., etc.
Have you read Gene Sharp, an American?
Yeah, I've read Gene Sharp. I've cited him also in the toolkit that I wrote.
That's it. And it takes some investment.
Yeah, so how do democracies engage with this? An authoritarian regime like China is not answerable. In democracies, people are.
No, but that toolkit was mostly for autocracies.
The toolkit is for democracies.
No, but look, if it's a genuine democracy and a robust democracy, it's able to handle it like we have managed to handle it. They threw everything they could between 2019 and 2024. Did they not? The point is that, India is a country of 1.4 billion people. There will be some nonsense which happens in a country like this. In some corner, everything will happen. If you start telescoping it to show that, this is what is describing the whole country, that's not the case. But
so let me come back. Do you think violence is getting legitimized?
No, one second.
And Bangladesh is...
No, one second. Let me finish this point. I think it is important to understand that when you threw everything at India, the fact that Indian institutions work, the fact that Indian democracy works, meant that you were not successful in what you were trying to do. So that is a lesson for everybody. That does not mean that these guys have given up trying. And the only real way to fight it is, yes, you have to fight it through administrative and legal means, and you have to fight it politically. And you have to do it sensibly. You don't lock up everybody, but you contest with them in the political and the intellectual space. So that is the India part. But now, violence...
No, so is violence now the new legitimate route to power?
The violence has always been a route to power, if you can pull it off. And it has always been used by big powers to effect regime change. When was it not used? I don't know why we are acting as though, this has suddenly started happening. When did the Americans and the Western countries not use violence to effect regime change or, destabilize countries? When have they not used it? When have they not backed dictators and violent takeovers to Chile? We've forgotten. What did they do in Chile? They didn't like Allende. They orchestrated a coup. Augusto Pinochet was their favorite for many, many decades until they finally wanted to lock him up for committing crimes against humanity. So, can you see that the same guy who you were lauding as somebody who had saved freedom in Chile, later on the Brits were ready to lock him up on human rights violations. You didn't know that he was committing human rights violations when you were calling him a defender of freedom? Come on, man.
On that highly optimistic note, thank you, Sushant. But I think Bangladesh story is not over yet. I think we will have you on this podcast once again sooner rather than later. But thank you for joining us.
Pleasure. Always.